Hi, it's Phil here from ArtTutor and welcome to this short lesson that I said I'd do if we reached 10,000 members, which we have done and then some, which is fantastic. I'm going to do a series of lessons over the coming weeks, different subjects, different styles, different media as well, and I'll try and do at least one a week and then post them to this group. If you've got any requests, please by all means put them in the comments below. I'm not obviously going to be able to do them all, but I'll definitely read through them all and then I'll cherry pick the ones that are easy. Now I'll have a look at the ones that I think I'm capable of doing and that will be most popular. First and foremost, I hope you and your family are keeping well as obviously can be expected in what are very surreal times. Thank you for joining this group, for the artwork that you've posted, for all of the comments on that artwork. I had a little look earlier. I think there's been 500,000 interactions since the group began, which is just incredible. So let's move on to the lesson then. So this is my entry for day 3 and the theme was interiors. This is my living room at home, which I've spent a lot of time looking at over the last week. I'm probably going to spend a lot more time looking at as well. I've got to say straight away, interiors are quite challenging, much more so I think than exteriors, than street scenes, than buildings and architecture outdoors. I've added a theme right at the end of this challenge and called it home. I thought that was quite a fitting way to finish the 30 days. So if you have a go at an interior for that particular theme, don't be too hard on yourself if you find it tricky, especially if you're going to be working from life. You know, if you're sat on a sofa or wherever it may be and you're trying to judge the angles and the shapes there from life, it is tricky. So what I would suggest to you is to take a photograph as well. Have a go at drawing from life, but if you struggle too much with that, work from the photograph. You'll find it much easier to judge those angles and those big shapes. In terms of the medium, I thought I'd try pen and watercolour for this. Now, I am not a watercolourist, and that is going to become very apparent as you watch this lesson. But what I've found is that pen work on top of watercolour, especially in this kind of sketchy style that I've gone for, is really, really forgiving. So if you're the kind of person that struggles taming watercolour paint, I'm definitely with you on that, and I hope you'll take a little bit of confidence from this lesson. Materials, so I used drawing paper because that's all I've got at home. The watercolour paper that I have is in the studio. It's not ideal drawing paper for wet media, but you know, it's a sketch. We can make it work. And then I had 3 brushes, but 2 would have been fine. So I think it was a medium-sized brush that I used, a size 12 round brush, and then a smaller one, maybe an 8 or a 6, something like that. And my brushes are really cheap synthetic brushes. I got them from Amazon. I like really cheap. I think they were about less than $10 for a pack of 6. So quality of materials so far really isn't going to matter. And then I've got this set of 36, I think it's 36 watercolour pans, half pans, that I found it was lying around our studio a long time ago, and it's been sat in a drawer at home. It's by Winsor & Newton. I think it's their student quality range, Cotman range. And I really don't like it because there's just far, far too many colours. And every single one of these pans is wrapped in paper, really fiddly. You can see I haven't bothered unwrapping most of them. Anyone that's seen any of my lessons will know that I'm a huge advocate of limited materials, particularly limited colours. And this many is just overwhelming. If I had a bit more time, if I wasn't being so lazy, I'd have taken half a dozen of the pans out and I would have put that box well out of sight. I'll mention the colours as I use them, as we're going through, where I can remember the names. But please don't get hung up on specific colours. It's absolutely irrelevant. I am literally just picking the first colour that I can see that looks something like what I'll need. If I did this sketch again, I'd probably use a completely different set of colours. Now, the only other materials you're going to need are a pencil, an eraser, a ruler, and of course a black waterproof pen. So I use Sakura pens. I think they're the best available. They're really, really affordable. You can get a pack of 6 dead cheap on Amazon or from whatever art store you like to buy from. Now, the last thing that I'm going to say about the setup is that I've tried to set myself a time target for all of these challenges of 30 minutes. And this one, I didn't get anywhere near that. It took me a lot longer than that. I'll give you some of the times as we go through the various sections as we go. I think the reason that it took me longer is because, well, A, I'm a terrible judge of time, as my wife will attest to, and B, I went far too big. So the paper that I used for this is A3 size, and I should have gone with A4. But hey ho, it's the mindset that counts. I just tried to go as fast as possible because that's going to stop me from getting too hung up when things go wrong. and it's going to stop me from overworking stuff as well. So here is my line drawing, and as I say, I was sat on the sofa whilst looking after my 4-year-old who disappeared upstairs at one point and went very quiet, always ominous. And when I asked if he was all right, and he said, "I'm just making Lola look pretty," I knew that it was going to be bad, and it was. This is Lola, our 6-year-old French bulldog, covered in my wife's lipstick. So there was a mad panic cover-up operation before she got back from the shops. Obviously, she still found out, because it turns out that lipstick doesn't come off dogs even after 2 baths. Anyway, back to the drawing. So there's 2 ways that you could approach this. You could start with the focal point, so the fireplace and the TV, and then work your way outwards. And I'd say that's more of an advanced method. The easier method, the one that I would recommend for most people with an interior, is to do what a builder would do. So start by constructing the basic walls with the perspective and the angles and the lines, but without any detail. So you wouldn't put the chimney breast in, no furniture or anything like that. When you're happy with the walls, the blank walls, then you would start to add the big fixtures. So windows, if there's windows in it, the chimney breast, the fireplace, but without the details of the logs and that kind of stuff. And then you would add the big bulky furniture. And then lastly, as you would do when you were furnishing a house, you would start to add the details, the ornaments and the cushions, the soft furnishings. Now, I didn't use a ruler for any straight edges in the initial drawing. I probably should have, especially at this size, because I was constantly turning my paper around. I had it on a piece of cardboard, constantly turning it around, and I did struggle to get some of the verticals, straight lines, trying to draw them freehand. Now, anyone that's familiar with perspective drawing will know what a vanishing point is. Although this is a more deliberate kind of sketch than an outdoor sketch, I'm definitely not going to start using things like vanishing points and horizon lines. That's far too kind of technical for my liking. I just don't think it's warranted. You know, particularly if you can hold your pencil up, close one eye, hold your pencil up, whether it's, you know, you're working from life or from a photograph, and just use your pencil to judge those angles. You really don't need to start putting vanishing points all over the place and drawing dozens and dozens of straight lines with a ruler. Okay, so that's pretty much the drawing side of things. I'll cover some more drawing lessons in future lessons. Let's move on now to the initial ink work. Okay, so you can see then, even though I didn't use a ruler for the initial pencil sketch, the first thing that I'm doing with the pen is to get those verticals in. A bit of a bugbear of mine. I find it really jarring when verticals aren't vertical, so I wanted to get those in with the ruler, and some of the horizontals as well, the TV, the kind of the roof line there. But the thing to note is that I'm not using a ruler for every single straight edge in the drawing. This bit here, I'm freehand. I've speeded this up a little bit, but I'm doing this quite quickly. This is obviously a man-made wooden fireplace. It's got scalloped edges on there, so I want them to be jaggedy and wobbly lines. I don't want them straight lines at all. You can see as well on the unit here on the left-hand side, they're straight edges, but I'm happy to put them in freehand. So it's only the big major kind of straight lines that I'm looking for to use a ruler. And then moving on to the settee, the thing to note here is that I'm starting now to vary the weight of line. So if you look at the top edge of the sofa there, you can see that it's quite a light line from the reference photograph, whereas the one underneath is got a bit of shadow there, so I'm using a stronger line. And that's something that you want to try and just pay a little bit of attention to as you're adding in your initial ink work. On this clock here, we'll just zoom in on this a little bit. So what I'm not doing is creating a really strong outline edge all the way around. You can see there's, look in that top right hand corner there, there's bits of the line missing, so it's kind of a hit and miss line. This centerpiece here, I'm not drawing it in as a really neat square. I'm only doing 3 of the edges there. And again, this is the kind of thing that you want to do throughout your initial pen work. This curtain on the right hand side, because this is kind of right on the periphery of the picture, on the far edge, I'm getting really loose, really hit and miss. And then for the fireplace, we'll speed this up quite a lot. All I'm doing here is just going over the pencil marks that I've already made. Just, again, drawing in loose shapes, trying to vary the weight of line, keeping those lines hit and miss as well. So the last thing that I want to do is have this look cartoon-like, where all of the lines are very strong and very thick. Using a ruler again just for this frame of the TV, because it's quite a thin border, So I'd struggle to do that freehand. Right hand side here, so we'll just bring up the reference photograph. This is a painting that I did of my wife's 2 horses, and it's because it's really, really small, it's actually quite difficult to draw this in and it not look odd and not look strange. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking for major proportions. So I'm looking at the distance between the eyes and the nostrils, for example, and then the ears as well. And I'm not trying to draw in an accurate horse. I'm starting with a very, very basic oval shape there, and then I'm looking at where are those eyes in that oval shape and where are the nostrils in relation to that eyes. And as long as you get the overall big proportions right, the details aren't going to matter. Okay, so you don't need to worry about getting it really, really accurate. You're just trying to create an impression for, you know, something like this that again is on the periphery of the sketch. And then same for the fox on the pillow. So I'm just going to do this as basic shapes. You can see a bit of a triangle there for the head, an oval for the body, and then another oval for the back hind legs. And then I'm just putting in the legs as sticks because I know that I can add weight and bulk to that with a bit of pen work and a bit of watercolour later on. Just looking at those big proportions. So this bit here, I'm just putting in some guidelines for the tiles that are going to be on the chimney breast. These are not straight, you know, they're rustic tiles. I should know, I put them up. They're definitely not straight. The last thing I want to be doing here is drawing these in with a ruler and getting really kind of accurate, neat lines. Definitely, we don't need that. What you'll notice is that I've started at the top and worked down a little bit, and then started from the bottom where the TV is and worked up a little bit. That just gets you a bit more of an even distribution rather than going from the top and all the way down. Okay, so on to adding some colour. Now the watercolourists watching this are going to shudder because I'm using here, I think it was lamp black, just a really light mix of lamp black. So ordinarily I would mix a black with 3 different primaries, but just purely for speed and laziness, I used a black that was in there. And mixing in a little bit of, it looks like yellow ochre there, and maybe burnt sienna or a light red at the bottom. Just something that I felt represented very loosely the major colours that were in the tiles, the brickwork on the chimney breast. I'm not worried again about accurate colours at all. So if I did this again, I might choose a different yellow. I'd probably mix a black and maybe a different red colour. I'm using here, as I said, drawing paper, and at this moment the watercolour looks like it's going on okay, doesn't it? But you'll see in a minute when it dries, it just looks terrible, absolutely terrible. But there's a lesson in that. There's something to take confidence from, because hopefully you'll see from the end, it really doesn't matter. As bad as it looks halfway, 2/3 of the way through the sketch, when we get to the end, it really isn't noticeable. And then just mixing up looks like a kind of a burnt sienna and maybe a burnt umber as well, just for the fireplace. So what I'm doing here is painting in the shapes, adding a little bit of that yellow mixture just to vary things up. So I'm not running the brush over the entire fireplace, I'm trying to paint individual shapes. And what that will do is it will leave these white marks, dropping the brush there and making a mess. Again, it doesn't matter. But it's leaving these, painting these shapes are leaving the kind of the white marks in between, which just helps to separate things, adds a little bit of character as well. And then adding a little bit of a darker brown in there just to add some shadow tone. We'll cover the tones and the various tonal values with the pen work at the end. This is just add a little bit of variation at this stage. And then similar colour, just a little bit more yellow, a little bit lighter as well for the logs. Same for the bookcase on the left hand side. So I'm not mixing up a colour specific to this, I'm just using what's already on the palette. And then a darker, stronger colour, like that shadow colour, just inside to represent the kind of dark shadow areas behind the books and the ornaments. And then this is that lamp black again, shock horror. This lamp black with a little bit of Prussian blue added, it looks like. Very, very light mix, lots of water. And I'm using this for the sofa. Now, if you look at the reference, it's a bit more of a purpley, pinky grey. But again, I'm not worried at all. I'm just going to use this colour and paint these individual shapes, which is going to help separate things. Lots of white marks left there. That adds character, helps to give it a bit more of a sketchy feel, a bit of a looser, more sketchy feel. Same colour but a stronger mix just for the shadow side. And then we'll speed this side up, but exactly the same process for the sofa on the left. And what you'll see with the sofa on the left is, as it gets towards the left-hand side, so the outer edge of the paper, I'm using a really, really kind of light mix, adding lots of water just to help soften things off. So it kind of fades in this little bit like a vignette effect on that left-hand side. Now this is, again, the lamp black, so a strong version of that for the fireplace. And if we zoom in on that, what I hope you can see is that I'm trying to leave some very, very subtle white lines and white marks in between the different shapes. It just helps to break it up from being this one big solid block of black, which would be too jarring on the eye. It would be too distracting. We want to break that up. Real dark colour here for the top of the grate, the top of the fireplace. Just touching some of that shadow in between the logs as well. Now for the picture frame on the left-hand side, just look at how sloppily I do that. I mean, that's terrible. Even that was too much for me. Tried to lift it out, drying really, really quickly on the cartridge paper. But you'll see from the end result, it's not noticeable at all. Now this is interesting. So I really struggled just painting a black rectangle. You know, there you go. Who'd have thought? It's the limitations of my watercolour skills and the combination of that and the drawing paper. But I'm applying this black and the brush is lifting the pigment off. You know, I'm trying to lift the board up there just to help it run down, but it's just getting worse and worse. And I think, yeah, at this point, I think I just give up, let it dry, and think I'll come back to that later on, see if there's anything we can do with it. Just adding a few little bits of brown in there, probably raw umber, something like that, just to create these cushions on the left-hand side. And this cushion here, I basically just made it up as I went along. So I've used, looks like a light red there, the black again. I think I put a little bit of muddy yellow in, a bit of yellow ochre. Yeah, and it's, again, a bit of a mess at this stage. It looks pretty terrible. The green is quite nice, so I like that colour. It's not the same green that is on the actual reference, but it's a nice contrast with that red, nice complementary to the red. And then I'm mixing up a very, very pale yellow colour. It's a bit of a muddy colour as well, isn't it, just for the back walls. And just look at that chimney breast. Look at the way that the watercolour is bloomed and is kind of running. It's just terrible. It really is awful. But again, don't worry, because at the end of, if this happens to you, the Inkwork will pull everything together. So now I'm adding some nice, vibrant, strong colours to the books. You don't want too many of these throughout the picture, but you do want it in some places, just to add that interest, just to lift things a little bit. I'm not following the reference to any degree whatsoever here. I have no idea what books are on that shelf. I'm just picking out some nice, strong colours, thicker mixes of paint, so that they're going to stay strong even when they've dried. Same for the chair legs there, the bottom of the sofa. Nice, strong, bright red on there. And then this is the lamp black with a little bit of, looks like yellow ochre in there, just to create a bit of shadow area beneath the sofas. Same on the left-hand side. I think I add in a little bit of purple in there just to vary that tone as well. And then for the fox on the left-hand side, nice, strong, bright orange, real nice contrast to the green, and just painting in basic shapes. I think I use a little bit of the dark brown or black just to put an impression in of the legs as well. But you're not trying to paint in features of the fox. You know, I'm not worried about eyes and noses and things like that. It's all about those basic proportions. A little bit of extra colour there just on the curtain, but again, very, very quick because it's right on the periphery of the sketch. And then can we do anything with this TV? So I'm just mixing up a stronger mixture of that black and whatever other colours are underneath the palette, and just doing another layer on top. All right, so on to the Inkwork. This was the longest stage of the drawing. The watercolour took me about half an hour. I think this took me about 40 minutes. And all I'm doing is I'm using hatching marks, diagonal hatching marks, just to start creating some tonal contrast, so the lights and the darks between the different areas, so strengthening shadow areas. But what I'm not doing is I'm not using lots and lots of marks on every single part of the drawing. I want areas where there's calm, areas where there's no ink marks. Here's a good point. Look at this texture on the settee, just an impression on one left-hand edge. So I'm not doing the textural pattern right throughout the sofa. Strengthening those shadow areas there. And then a little bit of work underneath the settee, just again, strengthening the shadow areas around the cushions. So I'm looking at the reference, I'm looking where are the darks, where are the strongest darks, and those are the areas that I want to focus on with the pen. So you can see that's a really, really dark area in and around that unit there, so I want to really strengthen that. A little bit of detail on the books, on the ornaments and the clock. And very, very loose on that curtain on the right hand side. And then this is where I've got to try and tidy up this mess of a picture. So I'm adding a little bit of Inkwork to the horses, the two horses, just to strengthen the shape. It's not great that, you know, again, that's probably one of the weaker areas of the sketch. Very, very light marks for those tiles on the floor. I don't want these to be harsh, straight edges. And then is there anything we can do with the TV? So I'm neatening up the edges, and then I'm using these diagonal hatching marks to try and unify all of that shocking watercolour wash underneath. And it's actually, you know, I got away with it. It worked out not too bad. Just adding a little bit more watercolour here. So just some of the areas I think need lifting with shadow. And I felt if I'd have just used ink there, it would have become a bit too strong. The black pen would have been too strong. So I'm just going back from colours that were already on the palette and just adding in a little bit more colour to the shadow areas. Bit of dark black there. So for the bricks, just dotting in individual bricks. I'm obviously not going to do every single one. I'm starting off with some of the red bricks, and then there's some yellow ones there, some of the yellow ochre. Same colours that I used for the washes underneath. And this is why those really awful watery blooms are not going to matter, because all you're going to see over the top are the texture of the individual bricks. That just looks like a bluey grey that I'm putting in there. Once I'm happy with those, I'll then use the pen just to outline some of them, but I'm not going to outline every single brick. That would look far too overworked. And I'm not going to outline every edge as well, so I don't want to be drawing complete rectangles. I'm going to do the bottom edges of some of the tiles, the top edges of others, left hand, right hand, and so on and so forth, just to vary those marks. Okay, just a few finishing details on here, just a little bit more watercolour, just in places. Getting to the point where, you know, you don't want to do too much, it becomes overworked. And there we have the finished sketch. So in terms of the times that it took me half an hour to draw out the initial pencil sketch, sat on the sofa, a good half an hour. And then it took me another 5-10 minutes or so to do the initial ink work. You know, there wasn't a lot there. It was just shoring up the verticals and some of the horizontals and just getting a basic outline to work with. So that took me 10 minutes. And then the watercolour took me exactly half an hour. And then that final stage there with all the ink work and a little bit of extra touches of watercolour, that took me about 40 minutes. So in total, it was probably approaching close to 2 hours. And as I say, you know, this was a half an hour target that I had. It was never going to happen, obviously. I went far too big. A3 size was far too big for this to do it in that time frame. But even though it was an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours, all the way through, I was working as quickly as possible. Certainly with the watercolour paint and the ink at the end there, I probably took the most care over the initial sketch, the initial outline sketch. And I think if you do that and you take care over the initial drawing, it allows you to get loose and carefree later on without it just looking really, really sloppy and really, really messy. This is why I always say that your drawing skills are the most important part of any piece of art that you do, those underlying drawing skills, because without those, you know, the foundations just fall apart, and instead of something looking loose and impressionistic and energetic, it just looks scruffy and messy. You've got to have those solid drawing skills underpinning everything. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful. The one thing that I want you to take away from this more than anything else, if there's one lesson that I could give you, it's just to have a little bit of patience, self-belief, self-confidence. particularly with this style, that if things aren't going well, if it looks a mess, if it looks like it's, going to be one for the bin, just wait until you've added that final pen work, those final marks, because that very often will tie everything together. So I'm going to go and think of something now for day 4. I might skip a few days and go to day 7 or day 8, but I'll do another lesson. I'm going to do a lesson as well for the first 2 that I did, if you saw them, the tangerine segmenting coloured pencils, really easy one that, so I'll do one for that. And what else did I do? Oh, the tortoise and charcoal on a coloured ground as well. That's a nice one as well, one that you can do quite quickly. So until next time, please keep enjoying the group. Let's keep it positive, let's keep it really welcoming, keep that community spirit going, and I'll see you next time.